now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank.
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to – he's doing interviews with them. They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you win. So they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now,
like what exactly, like what are the regulations in terms of like what you're allowed to do and donate, and how did he violate them?
So I think the big violation was you're not supposed to. He cleaned up on all his own customers, just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out. I start covering it, and then I start to get cease and desist letters. They don't like that. So they start to send me, they say, hey, you better shut up or we're going to sue you. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to stop making these videos. You withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one.
Regulated, like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC. Said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that. And like one of the first things the guy does is he controls it, but he renounces ownership. He goes, oh, I'm passing it off to some sham director. And he goes, I don't have anything to do. I don't know. Was going to undo sort of everything. Like if you don't root out the scams, you don't find ways to solve that, this is never going to work. Because if you're want to store your money somewhere else, how do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me, I have ads, like get rich quick schemes. Like you've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis telling you, they're like 25 years old telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million. It's Coinbase. It seems like they're, legitimate. But so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like eventually got paid out like $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all
easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. That these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant because it is basically it's almost impossible to trace. Actually, campaign finance laws I've heard are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate. A lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the like most fair case you could make about appreciate your transparency, kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that these guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys? And she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery. But ultimately, the outcome of that is like, yeah, I encrypt all your data. Joe, send me. I know you're this successful podcaster. I want you to send me crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But a lot is inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So where's the money? I don't know. But he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is like you put the $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet?
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it he's
kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did. But I start doing that, and after I cover get rich quick schemes for a while, you think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. It's this guy who drives a Toyota. So you go like, well, why does he need to scam me if he's driving a Toyota, right? Then it's like, which Sam Bankman-Fried did. Then it's like, okay, reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety. It's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to. It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, he's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was, it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and he knew they have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTX.
Bizarre that so many people got duped, and I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this an
So the person's not named in the report who was donating to Democrats. We know the one donating to Republicans was Ryan Salami. But that person eventually they're setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke. Right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like the money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
I really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil or any on sticks or something. Like it was never. The problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right? It wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after like the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over. Whoa. Like, what are you saying in the terms of service that means that I can't sue you? You have all these terms of service that basically say none of what I'm saying is true. Like they say they can get you rich in the sales pitch and then touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. Like it's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank. Your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. They've recently been shut down. But the idea was
just the idea of putting your money into Tornado Cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better
just kind of grifting here? And so, but you'd see him in nice cars, and so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch of lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams. A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all this big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west. Never understood how Bernie Madoff got people, because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I notice with all of these things, the thread is ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX stuff, you're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? Dark, where it's like you can donate through super PACs, political action committees, and you can donate as much as you want, and you don't have to be, your name has to appear nowhere. And so that's actually...
Or is it just pure addiction? I think, those multiplayer games, those, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like a...
I think it's a... Is it a MOBA?
On and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could do...
Right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time. Money system. Especially in our modern age, it seems like you can understand where they're coming from, the average person. The problem is when the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless.
Mm.
So you think you have all this collateral, who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other, people, or it's just like...
Well, how does he skate on that?
I hadn't really found my footing, but throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. You do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild, too. The whole scene was wild.
Which thankfully she did, and she's fine now. She takes medication to replace the hormones her thyroid would generate. But I saw my mom kind of get swept in this thing that I knew was nonsense from the arms of one huckster to another. Like, it's just like, it's almost to something worse. There are story broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? He happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have...
But I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. Everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, a lot of people had... And it just was kind of... I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to, even before that, I had done a show where I was, trying to break down these topics. I was like...
Figured it out, and someone would have started dumping their coin.
Yeah, people already... even leading up, CZ gets a lot of the credit for it, but, already, a day before...
I don't really understand what's going... the FTX thing, for example, is the best one, because I was so in the dark about this thing. I was like, what is happening? What are they doing? Try to break it down for us. First of all...
Friedberg, shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy...
What was his... I remember, but what was his
I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. That's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. It's left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the money. Some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I was just there was something different about the reaction to it. Vic
do something like that. Why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. This is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing to handle now, is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. It's insane how deep. He was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane. But so we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, he was the most notorious and well-respected. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly.
Go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We'll restructure the company. We'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime, any store. Yeah, tokens is the individual. You can think of currency, right? So it's the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum, God mode on Ultimate Bet, where the CEO could see everybody's hands and play on the site, seeing everybody's hands. So he just, Coinbase or something like that.
Right.
So FTX launches. Let's start with who Sam Bankman-Fried is. He's kind of at the center of all of this. Sam Bankman-Fried is this guy who he's the son of two Harvard law executives, Ryan Salami or something. I think that's his last name. Salami. I don't know. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But he was the number 3 donor to the Republican Party. But it was all orchestrated through Sam around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar.
People that were standing out and saying none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. There was tease for a while, but I eventually pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers and I wanted somebody to say, you can't do that, and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. This doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games, and that's why I lost the money.
But most of this $10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, information about that. He says, hey, I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. One of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them and, I have to do the company. So they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, 100x leverage. You can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this fancy language for a way to anonymize your transaction. You put it to that token, then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. There's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative. All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other being well, that guy did it. What? It's the hottest deal. Smart thing, which is something like this happens, you shut up. You don't say anything.
Right.
And then you point at your boss. I mean, that's basically what they did.
Oof.
Which they for sure did stuff wrong too. After the fact, he's still playing video games, and you're can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
Make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had. And that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. In the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about?
Mm.
I mean, ultimately, it's and so I realized, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology. And somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's
involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019.
Initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And views about what? Like you didn't start doing this. You started doing just like a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies, and is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money
So
there.
is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
Not actually like this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became NFT. I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick. So you have Dogecoin. You have SafeMoon. You have FTT, which is what FTX was using as their native token. So a lot of these guys, you'll start a crypto exchange. Don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few
LGBTQ plus causes, and it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this, and they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through who's all these other wallets that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist, gay. So like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it, like.
No, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So hey, you're going to be the guy. And so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron, and he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. Reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says, actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshoring FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's on
Ethereum. What are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
I lied my way into it. I can sort of lie my way out of it. And this is what he did. So prior to this, I'd interviewed him twice before, and I had kind of gotten hamstrung with he's just so good at dodging stuff. They kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, like, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers, and we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the token. Money and go start trading with it unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But, like, they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. These exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices. And then after he made his money that way, we don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went?
What is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam. Really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal, and we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there, and all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like, if you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China, like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here, maybe that's a big deal. Fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like you have to do. I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, it's almost used something. Because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why with regulators? They were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this, like, battle between them. And ultimately, her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. they're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this at the end when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me on. Let me ask him some real hard questions, because all these guys are like, Sam, and then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. I saw all this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to like, I want to say something, but why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, these people pitching this stuff and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video.
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. Like, the more I study, there's no Ethereum left. There's no Bitcoin left. You don't have the real tokens anymore. You just have your sort of nonsense FTT tokens, the tokens you invented. And he said, literally had a $10 billion account that he mislabeled with Alameda Research.
Mislabeled?
Yeah, he lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for. They bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it, Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names, and also or something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're So by the third interview, I'd studied him and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to, it was the terms of fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett, that when everything goes wrong, then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of like built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader. It's like the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was someone was backing him. So then it was okay, and then I think a lot of these people deferred.
Chemtrails.
Let me say this. If it's too good to be true, if they're offering market returns that you want to believe in, you go, man, I want to believe this is real. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader.
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
So before, it's like if I send you $1 and then you send that dollar on, we can easily trace that back to me, right? It's like here. But if I send $1 to you and everyone's sending you $1, and then you're sending $1 to all middleman because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin, like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then you sort of, this is a fraud because no one knew. There's a bunch of backing. So I made a video at the time being like, this crypto CEO just describes a Ponzi scheme. His whole thing was he did this thing with Ultimate Bet. So he was one of the lawyers. So there's this poker site called Ultimate Bet, and he got caught in this scandal where they had enabled this thing called. That is his background. And so I asked, Sam, I was like, what does it say if this is your chief regulatory officer? This guy, because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want, now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they'd like to get paid.
Hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some, third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so that
crypto
ransomware, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Because before it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these places where you can kind of send money without too much scrutiny, FTT tokens, and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
FTX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like it was very opaque, collateral like dollars or like some asset. We'll give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin, and that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value. Everything, I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. Everybody. I ask him, and he doesn't want to talk to me. So, but he's going on these Twitter spaces. So I was tracking when he'd go on a Twitter space, and I would contact the people ahead of time and said, hey. So he called it Fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled. And that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cohodes, he's a famous short seller. There was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed. And people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could